17 of the House of Commons Committee on Industry and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. The committee is meeting to study the domestic manufacturing capacity for a COVID-19 vaccine. And today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. So those present in the room in Ottawa, you know the rules in place, so please govern yourself accordingly. And I want to thank all the witnesses who are here with us today. We have many witnesses for both panels on the first and the second hour. So for the first hour, we have from the Department of Industry, Monsieur Éric Costen, qui est sous-ministre adjoint.
Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Industry Sector. Rodrigo Ancibia, I hope that I pronounced your name correctly. Senior Director, Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing Branch. Daryl C. Patterson, Director General, Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing Branch. And finally, Daniel Quinn, Director, Research Infrastructure and Outreach. And we also have from the National Research Council of Canada, Maria Aubry, Vice President, Strategic Initiatives, and Lakshmi Krishnan, Vice President, Life Sciences. So thank you all for being with us today for this first hour. And for the second hour, we have as an individual, Dr. Alain Lemar, Full Professor, Institut National de Recherche Scientifique. We also have John Fulton, President, Spokesperson, and Representative for BioLease Pharma Corporation. From Biotech Canada, Andrew Casey. And from BioVectra, Oliver Techno. And Dr. Mark Sauer. And finally, for Vaccine and Infectious Diseases Organization, International Vaccine Center, we have Dr. Volker Gertz, Director and Chief Executive Officer. So this is quite a busy panel, so I'll ask everyone to please watch the time carefully. And of course, when there's 1 minute left, I have a little signals, a red card to show you the time ends. And we'll start off for the first hour with, I imagine, Mr. Costin.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, members. On behalf of my colleagues, we're very pleased to be here today to provide you with an update on domestic biomanufacturing capacity in Canada. It's well established that at the outset of the pandemic, Canada had very little biomanufacturing capacity required to produce relevant vaccines. This reality was the result of a 30 to 40-year decline in the sector, which saw major firms exit the country, and it hindered our ability to attract manufacturers of COVID-19 vaccines to Canada. From the very outset of the pandemic, the government immediately set to the task of addressing these biomanufacturing gaps through a series of strategic investments. This process began with a thorough review of Canada's existing industrial capabilities for biomanufacturing, looking at existing production capacity in particular in order to identify both critical gaps and existing assets where there were opportunities for growth. Informed by this view and motivated to urgently expand domestic capacities to develop and manufacture vaccines, the government immediately sprung to action. And since the spring of 2020, there have been investments of approximately $1.6 billion in new vaccine, therapeutic, and biomanufacturing projects. The government's long-term plan to ensure an innovative, responsive, and resilient sector was articulated in the Biomanufacturing and Life Sciences Strategy announced last summer. The strategy has two broad objectives. The first is to grow a strong and competitive domestic life sciences sector with cutting-edge biomanufacturing capabilities. And the second is to fundamentally enhance Canada's preparedness in order to respond to future pandemics and other health emergencies. The strategy has 5 pillars in pursuit of these objectives. The first is strong coordinated governance. The second is to strengthen research systems and the talent pipeline. The third is to grow world-leading companies in the sector. The fourth is to build public assets and public capacity. And the fifth is to enable innovation through world-class clinical trial systems and the regulatory environment. Under these 5 pillars, the strategy aims to build flexible manufacturing facilities across a portfolio of cutting-edge technology platforms to ensure that Canada has the ability and the flexibility to address a wide range of infectious disease threats while also fostering a sustainable industry that will drive economic growth. One of the first actions was to start construction on the NRC's Biologics Manufacturing Center in Montreal, which is an end-to-end production facility that will be capable of producing a wide range of vaccines and other biologics. The government has made several investments across the country, building on areas of strengths and where there is a strong base of innovation. For example, funding in support of the University of Saskatchewan's Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, or VIDO, for their clinical trials of its two COVID-19 vaccine candidates, as well as expansion of its facilities. To support end-to-end vaccine manufacturing capabilities across a range of technology platforms, investments have been made in companies such as Sanofi Pasteur and Resilience Biotechnologies, the latter of which having a multi-year agreement with Moderna to now produce their drug substance for their COVID-19 vaccine at its facility in Mississauga. To build up capabilities and supply chains in mRNA more broadly, the government has also invested in BioVectra's vaccine manufacturing facilities in Prince Edward Island. Other investments have been made in promising researchers and developers, like Precision Nanosystems in Vancouver. Recognizing that the success of antibody therapies in treating COVID-19, investments have also been made in pioneering developers like AbCellera, who are also located in Vancouver, in order to support their research and production activities. Since many vaccine manufacturers and developers often use contract manufacturers to fill their vaccines in vials and to package and distribute them, steps are also being taken to ensure an adequate presence of those services in Canada. The lack of this sort of manufacturing capacity was a critical gap identified at the outset of the pandemic, and we're making progress to address it. Investment attraction is critical to ensure that the sustainability and growth of this sector. In August 2021, the government signed a memorandum of understanding with Moderna, of course, a leading mRNA vaccine developer, in order that they would build a state-of-the-art mRNA vaccine production facility here in Canada. As a result of these investments and others, and ongoing work and negotiations, which we expect will lead to new projects and more capacity in the months and years ahead, Canada will have a diversified production capacity for hundreds of millions of doses across a range of vaccine platforms. Now, a sustainable and thriving biomanufacturing and life sciences ecosystem is not possible without a cutting-edge pipeline of science and research and the talent base to drive it. To this end, two other initiatives have also been launched. The Canada Foundation for Innovation will deliver a bioinnovation research infrastructure fund to support infrastructure needs at post-secondary institutions and research hospitals, as well as federal research funding agencies are delivering a new Canada Biomedical Research Fund. And this is designed to support high-risk applied research as well as training and talent development. In addition, colleagues at Health Canada are working to enhance and modernize the relevant regulatory systems, and the Canada Institutes of Health Research are preparing to launch a new clinical trials fund that will support clinical studies for new drug candidates. Taken together, the investments that have been made to advance the strategy will provide Canada with a diverse and strong base for domestic biomanufacturing capabilities that are needed to fight future pandemics. Now, at this time, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Maria, who will say a few more words about the NRC's Biologics Manufacturing Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to speak with you today about the National Research Council of Canada as part of your study on domestic manufacturing capacity for COVID-19 vaccines. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the National Research Council facilities are on the traditional unceded territories of many First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, and their ancestral footsteps and rights extend beyond the boundaries that exist today. We respectfully honor these people's rights, history, and relationships with this land. My name is Maria Aubry, and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and responsible for the design, build, and operationalization of the NRC's new Biologics Manufacturing Center. I am joined today by my colleague from the NRC, Dr. Lakshmi Krishnan, She's the Vice President of Life Science, and in this capacity, she oversees the Human Health Therapeutics, Aquatic and Crop Resource Development, and Medical Devices Research Centers. The NRC is Canada's largest federal research and development organization. Through the COVID-19 pandemic, the NRC has been an important contributor to Canada's response, including testing PPE and helping develop a Made in Canada solution for COVID-19 testing. The NRC also provided support to firms through the New Challenge programs and our Industrial Research Assistance Program, best known as IRAP. Today, IRAP has invested $81 million to support 14 small and medium enterprises developing Made in Canada vaccine and therapeutics. Through IRAP, the NRC also supported more than 2,200 innovative businesses, helping them weather the pandemic and preserving over 26,000 jobs in Canada. Early in the pandemic, the Government of Canada asked the NRC to establish the new Biologics Manufacturing Centre for biomanufacturing production at our Royal Mount campus in Montreal, Quebec. In June of 2021, we completed the construction of the center. This new end-to-end biomanufacturing facility is designed to produce cell-based vaccines and other biologics in compliance with good manufacturing practices. This includes viral vector, protein subunit, virus-like particles, and other recombinant proteins. The Biologics Manufacturing Center has a production capacity of approximately 4,000 liters, which could translate into approximately 2 million doses of a vaccine per month. It is important to note, however, that the number of doses will vary widely depending on the specific vaccine and the manufacturing yield. The Biologics Manufacturing Center was built to fulfill a public good mandate. This means if another pandemic or health emergency strikes, the Biologics Manufacturing Center will be made available to produce cell-based vaccines or other drugs to keep Canadians healthy and safe. In non-pandemic emergency times, it will focus on public interest projects such as the production of drugs for rare diseases to support the health of Canadians and protect those at high risk. Collaborating with industry and academic partners, the Biologics Manufacturing Center will complement and support Canada's domestic capacity and knowledge in biomanufacturing. In June of 2021, through the Budget Implementation Act, the NRC received royal assent for the legislative authority to engage in the production on any scale of drugs and devices, as those terms are defined in Section 2 of the Food and Drugs Act, for the purpose of protecting or improving public health in Canada or elsewhere. This new authority allows the NRC to produce vaccines and other biologics at the BMC on a commercial scale once all Health Canada approvals have been secured. The NRC is now completing the commissioning, qualification, and validation process of the center to demonstrate GMP compliance. This is required for all new biomanufacturing facilities producing drugs for humans in Canada. In February of 2021, the Government of Canada signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Novavax to pursue options to produce its COVID-19 vaccine at the Biologics Manufacturing Center. Once both the vaccine candidate and the facility receive the required Health Canada approvals. In February of 2022, Health Canada announced the authorization of the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine in adults 18 years of age and older. The NRC is working with Novavax on the technology transfer. It includes pilots from small to large scale to demonstrate the required quality characteristics through engineering runs and quality production batches. Once that is satisfactorily achieved and Novavax receives approval of production at the center, production can continue at commercial scale. To conclude, as an important part of Canada's broader biomanufacturing and life science strategy, the new Biologics Manufacturing Center will help increase domestic capacity for vaccine innovation and production to bolster Canada's resilience and preparedness. The Biologics Manufacturing Center is intended to serve as a foundational element for a proposed broader system or federal capabilities and assets to respond to future pandemics or other health priorities, supporting Canada's national biomanufacturing security and sovereignty. Thank you for your time and would be pleased to answer your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costa and Ms. Aubry. It's very appreciated. So to begin with, I'll give the floor to Mr. Genera for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Costin, am I to understand you didn't mention that Medicago is part of your range of partners in the development of vaccines in Canada? Are they among your partners? Can you confirm that Medicago is one of your partners?
Thank you very much for the question. Medicago are most certainly one of the vaccine manufacturers that we've invested in the country over the last a couple of years.
Est-ce que
when you choose, for example, partners for the development of vaccines or to invest so that the Canadian government can invest in production or development of vaccines, what is the process that you go through to verify the ownership of some of those businesses, or who are the partners in those businesses? And maybe you can see what my next question is going to be, to the extent that with the knowledge we have now, Medicago will not be able to sell and its medication or its vaccines elsewhere than in Canada, unless otherwise proven, because of its ownership or because of who the owners are or who the economic partners are. The business will not be able to sell its products outside of Canada. Was some verification done by the Canadian government in order to look into who are the co-owners or partners of that business?
So thank you again, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. Happy to answer it, to provide as much information I can regarding the process for making investment decisions and quite frankly, the situation in Canada's investment in Medicago. So the first thing I would say is that there is an extensive process for vetting requests for funding under the Strategic Innovation Fund, a significant due diligence that of course includes a significant examination of the financial situation of the applicant, including the ownership structure. The decision to base the decision, I think what I would do though is I would go back to the time frame in which the decision for funding Medicago was made. And the basis of those decisions was really shaped by the quality of the science and the view from Canada's experts regarding what held the most promise in Canada to quickly bring an effective vaccine to market. We'll of course recall that in 2020, there was a very urgent need to invest in a broader range of efforts to develop and bring to market a safe and effective vaccine. And Medicago has long been recognized by experts as being one of the stronger and most scientifically proven vaccine manufacturers operating in Canada. This view is not only the view supported by the Government of Canada, it's also one supported by the US government through their BARDA and DARPA programs have also invested in the company. And I think the decision to fund Medicago and develop their vaccine technology and their vaccine candidate is in some ways been confirmed by the recent regulatory decision and approval of their vaccine, which is only one of 6 made yet to date. Regarding the ownership structure, we were very well aware at the time that the PMI held a minority share in the company. It was examined carefully and not viewed as a contravention of the federal the framework convention on tobacco control. The focus really was on the quality of their science and the promise that their vaccine candidate brought with it, knowing that based on their science and their platform technology and the view from experts, that there was a high likelihood that this could be a promising vaccine candidate and one that was worthy of investment. And the final point I'll make regarding the WHO decision, as has been reported publicly, I think that by the company, I know Minister Champagne has stated this publicly. We're very aware that the company is looking with some urgency at the question of their ownership structure. And we continue to be in close contact with the company, understanding that they recognize the seriousness of the WHO decision and are moving to make decisions in order to address the challenges that they face.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. You'll understand that I fully agree with the fact that we wanted to value the products by Medicago. But the question I wonder about is the federal government's responsibility before injecting $173 million into a company, whatever may be the quality of its product. Would it not normally have been ensured in order to ascertain that the products from that company that they would eventually produce could be sold not only in Canada but around the world? Because the WHO has a policy that has not changed toward Medicago, because that was already the case before the government decided to invest in Medicago.
Again, thank you very much for the question. At the time of the investment, it really was an investment in their vaccine candidate and looking to get an effective and safe vaccine to market as soon as possible. The ownership structure and the challenge that it might present to them was not known at the time of the decision. It's probably worth mentioning that the Philip Morris, the PMI group, owns a minority share in the company. It is majorly controlled by Mitsubishi. It operates as an independent biomanufacturing company, and really the focus was on getting a safe and effective vaccine to market as soon as possible.
But Mr. Costin, I repeat my question. Mr. Généreux, I'm very sorry, but that's all the time we have. We'll now have to move on to Mr. Dong for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for coming today and participate in this study. My first question is for the public servants at ISED. I remember from the beginning of the COVID, the capacity to produce vaccine or potential vaccine candidate in Canada has been widely talked about in my writing and in the public. And then we found out that the capacity to produce has been tapering off for decades. Can you explain to me a little better what are we doing to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because it was due to decisions by all governments in the past to kind of allow the production of vaccines to leave Canada and land somewhere else. And how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? To the ADM, please. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to answer that question. So you're absolutely right. At the outset of the pandemic, when Canada went looking for the capacity that it could rely on to develop and manufacture a COVID vaccine, it found a sector that had been largely diminishing over many years. I could certainly turn to my colleague Daryl Patterson, who could describe to you some of the major exits over the last few decades. But before I do that, what I might really emphasize is, having done that survey and really looked for a number of very core capacity attributes, looking for the ability to manufacture vaccines across major different vaccine platforms. Because as I'm sure most of the members of this committee will know, not all pathogens are the same and not all vaccines are the same, and they're not all built on the same platform. So in order to have a resilient biomanufacturing and life sciences sector, you need a diversity of capacity that cuts across multiple platforms, because you just don't know what pathogen is going to hit you. I mentioned that there are different parts of the value chain from all the way from basic science and R&D through to commercialization and so-called fill finish. And Canada had very little capacity on the back end. And so we've really prioritized investments now such that when we look and we do the math on the investments that have been made, we've gone from a position where we had very little to any capacity at scale to fill and finish vaccines. We now have an ability to fill and finish approximately 300 to 400 million doses per year across platforms, which of course not only puts us in a position to be able to serve the domestic needs of Canadians, even in situations where you would need multiple vaccines in a given year, but it also puts the sector on a sustainable footing in order to be able to provide much needed assistance globally.
That's great. Let me just stop you there for a second. I'm sorry. I have limited. I think I have 5 minutes or something. So you said to make sure that the sector is on sustainable footing. That's very important because I want to go back to my original question. Like, what happened for them to leave Canada? Was it because the profit margin just wasn't there? It's not sustainable to produce in Canada. And have we addressed the root cause of that problem? And because you did say that now, 300 plus a million every year, is that sustainable? Because the demand for vaccines may taper off as we exit COVID, right? Go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, sorry, looking for the mute button. If it's okay, I might turn to my colleague Daryl Patterson to answer that part of the question.
Sure, happy to jump in. Thank you for the question. I think, of course, there's a number of reasons why we've witnessed over the last 30 to 40 years a decline in manufacturing capacity in Canada. Essentially, we went from the early 70s to importing about 20% of our vaccines and therapeutic drugs to over 85% today. And I think as we saw over the course of these years, there's a number of factors. One is a decline in or companies concentrating their manufacturing in large markets where there's cost advantages and other underlying factors. I think the key thing that you're raising here is to make sure we have an ecosystem that's supported from clinical trials, from discovery to clinical trials to commercialization and to end stage production. And by focusing the strategy on all of the value chain, making those investments across the value chain, ensuring that we're developing flexible manufacturing capacity, that in non-pandemic times, when it's not focused on a specific vaccine, that there are other uses that can be put to those facilities, for example.
Absolutely. Sorry to cut you off. I want to get one more point in. How important is it for the public? Public production to get
I'm sorry, Mr. Dung. I'll be the one having to cut. I'll be the one having to cut
Thank you, Chair.
We're very tight on time. We'll have to go to Mr. Lemire for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Costin, please allow me to go back to the question from Mr. Généreux. You gave two rather different answers. Do you know or do you not know? Before allocating $173 million to Medicago, did you know who were the financial partners while being aware that the WHO had set conditions for the cigarette industry?
So thank you for the question. We did as I in my first answer, we did know. It's part of the due diligence process and looking at the financial situation of the company. We part of that is an examination of the ownership structure. And there was an awareness at the outset that PMI had a minority position in the over Medicago.
So perhaps a little lesson learned here. So Minister Champagne testified before the committee and committed to have the research. The center should be open in 2021. Do you agree? We agree that it's important to increase the vaccine capacity, and it's unfortunate having to have given up a standard bearer in Quebec's pharmaceutical industry, and as a result, more investments here in Canada. So in the approval process, are there still a lot of delays in the approval process for research centers, for laboratories in Canada?
I might turn to my colleague Daniel Quinn, who has oversight over research infrastructure and can probably provide you some some information regarding the process for laboratory approvals. Daniel?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. Supporting downstream biomanufacturing capacity with upstream investments in research and talent in post-secondary institutions and research hospitals is critical. This includes both the applied research funding supports as well as the infrastructure to support it. And so part of the consultations during 2021 found that along with the science,
C'est inaudible pour l'interprète.
Unfortunately, we can't hear you, the interpreter either.
I believe you're on mute for some reason, Mr. Quinn. Can you try again? Or is it on your, yeah?
thank you. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. I'll try and be brief. So certainly under budget 2021, there was significant investments for science and research, investments on both the talent pipeline, infrastructure, and applied research, and that includes the laboratories themselves. The strategy itself was released in the summer. Shortly thereafter, the Canada Foundation for Innovation released the Biosciences Research Infrastructure Fund. So that was done quite quickly after the release of the strategy in September. The containment level 3 and 4 laboratories that are funded from that competition are really the critical pieces that are necessary to support the infectious disease research for pandemic readiness under the strategy. Further to that, there will be a larger investment on the equipment side as well as the research side to follow. And so last week, the Canada Biomedical Research Fund, as well as the Biosciences Research Infrastructure Fund competition was also launched.
Dans le budget présent...
In the budget presented yesterday, only $20 million over 5 years is mentioned, starting in 22-23 for research health in Canada. So we ought to have high ambitions to rebuild the entire ecosystem for vaccine production. That amount appears to be little in proportion to our aspirations, including what Mr. Quinn said. I'd like to hear you on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think if we look back to last year's budget and the commitment to $2.2 billion, which is in addition to the $1.6 billion that has been spent to date, is really for us that's the marker for funding the strategy. And of the $2.2 billion, approximately $1 billion of that is dedicated to various research undertakings, whether it's through supporting building out research infrastructure or through the Biomedical Research Fund or the clinical trial support. So our strategy and executing on the strategy and rebuilding the sector is in many ways fueled by the funding that was allocated in the last spring's budget, and we have lots of work ahead of us.
The therapeutics research of the NRC, the center, could produce a vaccine provided by Novavax, an American company, once they receive the regulatory approval necessary. Could you tell us a little more about that and how the NRC manages its collaborations with private sector partners?
Maria?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. There are two portions to that. So the first one in regards to the engagement with Novavax, that's progressing very well. As you are aware, the construction of the facility is completed, as I indicated, and we're now focusing on the technology transfer through all the different phases and ensuring that it is done in accordance with the good manufacturing practices to ensure that there's sustainability to the facility, and that we end up with the ability to produce not only the Novavax vaccine, but to have demonstrated the capability of the center for ongoing support. In regards to collaboration and managing our partnership, I would like to pass it over to Dr. Krishnan, as the NRC not only, of course, has the Biologics Manufacturing Center, but the engagement starts right from the research and development through supporting clinical trials, and then on to now with the Biologics Manufacturing Center being able to do the production.
Thank you for that question, and thank you to my colleague Maria for the opportunity to intervene and present the way NRC collaborates with the industry. NRC has a long history of collaboration in the area of vaccines and biologics development with both Canadian industry and, where appropriate, with others. And we continually do this by partnering and identifying opportunities across the continuum of what we need to do to support the pipeline development and movement of R&D from early stage preclinical work to the later stages. And with the new production facilities that we will have in the Biologics Manufacturing Center, and also in the future, the ability to make clinical trial material, we will be able to provide an end-to-end support to the Canadian industry for advancing the pipeline. During the pandemic, we actually demonstrated that very early on in the pandemic. We actually worked with a number of Canadian industries, such as supporting the clinical trial, the preclinical work necessary to advance to clinical trial for VIDO's COVID-19 vaccine candidate, as well as working with VBI Inc., another Canada-based R&D unit and company, to advance their COVID-19 vaccine to clinical trials as few examples, as well as our industrial research assistance program supported many.
Thank you very much. We'll have to move now to Monsieur Mas for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being here. There is no doubt that the pandemic has highlighted the decline of Canada's manufacturing sector, not only with regards to vaccines, but with a number of different industries, and the remnants have actually had to transition to doing everything from medical equipment to hand sanitizer done from breweries, a whole series of things that have been identified as weaknesses before, as we have signed serious trade agreements that allowed environment or labor and working conditions to be used as a subsidy against our own manufacturing base. And this is no different in many respects, where the promises by the large RX&D and other pharmaceutical industries was actually to reinvest in Canada with tax reductions and also the extension of patents. That was supposed to bring a panacea of investment, which never took place. And I think that as we try to build our sector back here, and I'd like to ask Mr. Costin this, is Canada is one of 182 countries that signed on to the tobacco issues with regards to the WTO. And how much has this damaged our reputation? And in this process, what is being done to actually build that back? Because we're still waiting for a decision, and this is not like an unknown thing. Philip Morris has got a very clear history, and now we're caught in this situation. We're one of 182 signatures. What can we do at this point to bring in an internal process so it doesn't happen again?
So thank you so much for the question. So your question raises a number of really important issues. I mean, the first of which is to not lose sight of, Medicago is first and foremost a vaccine manufacturing firm that is majorly not controlled or doesn't, not by PMI. It is a completely independent. It operates in and around Quebec City. It has a site in North Carolina. It is a company that has gone from very much a startup to pre-revenue. It has shown exceptional quality in its science. The technology platform for its vaccine that it has brought forward is unique insofar as it offers a safe and effective alternative to mRNA vaccines. The promise of the science, the promise of the technology the quality of the company and the asset that it represents to Canada is very widely held amongst experts throughout Canada. The issue about its ownership structure and the legacy of PMI, I don't think are at all, like, I think there's no question there. I think Canada's position on tobacco control, its commitment to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, as you've indicated in your question, is long standing. When it came time to review the application for investment by the company, there was very careful consideration given to the question of what would be the implications of PMI in its minority stake in the ownership structure. And those considerations were weighed against the reality that we were a few months into a global pandemic. There was a race to get a vaccine developed and into the arms of people. And in that situation, and faced with those choices, understanding that there may be challenges associated with down the road, the science, the unanimous view from experts that this was a company worth investing in. This was a base of science that showed promise, and that in October of 2020, when there wasn't a COVID vaccine to be seen, was very much the decision that was taken. And then my final point, not to repeat myself or to be too long-winded, and I apologize for that, is really the ownership question that are being raised today, and the problem that the PMI ownership it presents to the company, its long-term viability as a member, the member's first questions are very much in the minds of the company right now. And we expect them to take action.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to leave it at that. I have a little bit extra time left, and I want to use it for another question. And I appreciate your answer. And it's not a difficult. It's a difficult situation. We're all involved here, but we've got to fix it real quick. So thank you for that. Real quickly, then, to move to my second question. With our investments that we're making in partnerships, Bill C-52, the original one for allowing for the generic production of vaccines, malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS, HIV, antiviral, it's Canadians' access to medicines regime was what it's actually come out to be. Do the products that we're actually producing and putting public money allow for the entrance of that automatically? This is known formally as John Chrétien's Aid to Africa Assistance Bill. We've only seen it used once because of the disastrous legislation that it is. However, do all of our medicines that we are actually co-funding through the public purse to help the general public, will they be compliant to allow them to be generically produced if the developer of the country does not do it at a low cost?
Thank you for the question. I will say off the top that you're asking a question that is not really in my area of expertise, nor my colleagues. I might turn to my colleague if we have time, Daryl Patterson, who could offer a few views, because you're asking a very big question about IP and patents, and we'll certainly do our best, but it may be something that we need to return to you on. But Daryl, do you want to try this?
But I'm afraid, Mr. Costin, that we're out of time for that. So maybe if you want to submit anything in writing, that's always possible via the clerk of the committee.
That would be appreciated.
We will now move to. Thank you, MP Moss. We'll move to Madame Gray for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Costin, what are the opportunities to reduce red tape in the domestic vaccine manufacturing space, and what easy fix can the government make right now to help manufacturers produce them here in Canada?
So thank you very much for the question. In terms of red tape reduction, so it's an interesting question. I think a few thoughts in response. I think there are opportunities that probably exist on multiple levels, and some of which have actually sort of proven out over the past 18 months, where you've seen a level of agility and rapidity or speediness in decision-making that was really kind of just brought to bear because of the necessity of the crisis that we were in. So in terms of ISED's responsibilities and the industrial program that we operate, the Strategic Innovation Fund, I think here, if we look back, we've seen several examples of a streamlined process that allows for decisions to be made efficiently and quickly, but reflecting on the discussion and or some of the questions by other members that don't necessarily sacrifice important questions of due diligence and scrutiny that is required, prior to the decisions associated with investing public money. So I think there's probably continued opportunities to ensure that we're balancing the need to have thorough due diligence while at the same time moving with agility and quickly, and as you say, to reduce reducing red tape in order to be able to support businesses, especially in times of crisis. I would also note, just if I can, that there's also likely a very important question around the regulatory regimes that exist to sort of course, to safeguard the public health of Canadians, but also to create the framework in which businesses operate in this space in Canada. And I think, again, we saw lots of very significant efforts made on the part of Health Canada to be agile and to be quick in their regulatory decision-making process, again, without sacrificing ultimately their responsibility to safeguard health. So two, I think, areas where there has been a mindful attempt to balance the need for speediness and avoiding unnecessary process, but not sacrificing kind of the integrity of the decision-making processes.
Great, thank you very much. Would you be able to give a couple examples of what those reduction in red tape might have been that occurred, and are there specific recommendations that have now been made to the minister?
Well, so in terms of examples, and here I may actually turn to Rodrigo to tell us. In the early stage of the pandemic, there were a number of significant funding decisions that were made early on, and in a very compressed time frame that have proven to be highly advantageous. I'm wondering, Rodrigo, if you could provide just a couple of quick examples.
I would like to highlight that for the first time there was a program and funding mechanisms to support high-risk, high-potential projects related to the development of vaccine or therapeutics to support the science and the companies working on those projects for the COVID-19 therapeutic or vaccine. So that was a funding mechanism, an instrument that was needed to de-risk the investment of the private sector or support the research at a university or academia. But at the same time, it was important for the regulator to have an agile mechanism and to very tightly work with other international regulators in the US or Europe to make sure that the standards were maintained, that the quality and the safety were in place and protected, and ensure that whatever comes out in terms of authorization would be safe and effective. So there were some instruments from the regulatory side that Canada led internationally in terms of allowing clinical trial data to be available to the regulator as it became available, as opposed to waiting for the whole phase 2 to end. So the speediness in regulatory approval as also funding. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess, we know that there were a number of processes that might have been expedited, at some point, and I guess what I'm, looking for is if there's some permanent, red tape reduction or processes that have been streamlined or different recommendations out of this as learning, moving forward.
So thanks for the question. I think the period, there's a period of reflection that's happening right now. There's a lot, we're still in the pandemic. We're all hopeful that it's in the rearview mirror soon enough. I think across government, you're going to see many of us reflecting on the experience and what worked and what didn't, or what could have worked better. I don't know that I have a specific example that I can point to right now, other than to say that process of reflection, advice, where can things be optimized, more efficient, quicker, without sacrificing, quality and safety. Those were sort of guiding principles from the very get-go. And I suspect that, to your point about how can these measures become part of the permanent landscape, that period of reflection is underway.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. We'll move to Mr. Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Joel. I want to start with the international obligation we have to help peer countries and developing countries who don't have access to the same vaccines that we do. And it's really important that we have a vaccine manufacturing capacity in this country for future pandemics and future crises, unquestionably. And it's nice to see the investments that have been made to ensure that we have a greater degree of preparedness. But you, Mr. Costin, just mentioned the pandemic. We're still in this pandemic, and we hope it's in the rearview mirror sometime in the near future, but it won't be in the rearview mirror in the near future for all countries because they don't have the vaccine coverage that we do. And I wonder, given the investments we've made to date in vaccine manufacturing related to COVID, when can we expect the first shipment of vaccines from a Canadian manufacturer to a country in need? And what does the ramp up of that production look like going forward?
Thank you for the question. So I think maybe there are two dimensions to the answer. One, of course, would have to do with Canada's donation strategy.
Well, let's bracket that off, because donations are vaccines we've procured from elsewhere and we plan to donate. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in what we are producing here at home and we plan to ship elsewhere.
Well, I'd look to maybe Maria, who could probably offer a thought on the time frame element of your question around getting vaccines from when the facility is qualified and when they're rolling off the line. Maria can provide, but in terms of speaking to and Novavax would probably be the first. This would be the first example of that. So perhaps Maria, you might be able to offer an answer to the question that's better than what I could offer.
Thank you for the question. The pandemic brought to bear, as it was originally indicated, the importance of being able to produce vaccines in Canada for our own certainty, but also to be able to support others, as you have highlighted. We are going as fast as we possibly can without actually jeopardizing or putting at risk the importance of producing vaccines in a safe manner in accordance with good manufacturing practices. The way that the Biologics Manufacturing Center is intended is that we don't own the vaccine. We work with people that are vaccine sponsors, then take that vaccine, such as the case with Novavax, and then produce it either for the need, first in Canada if we need it, obviously, but other countries in need. And that would have to be where the Canadian approval and the vaccine sponsor has the authority to bring it there. And therefore, for us right now, we are as I indicated, in the commissioning, qualification, and validation. We have completed the pilot runs with the Novavax vaccine.
I apologize. I understand there's a great detail to this, but I'm more interested in the timeline, the reasonably expected timeline, and the number of doses that we expect as well. I mean, surely we have sort of a trajectory here and a plan in place, and we say it's between X date and Y date, and this is our expectation. So what's the date we expect, and what are the doses we expect?
The actual date has to be determined in combination by the vaccine sponsor and Health Canada, because they will generate the approval. Right now, our target is to have our engineering runs and our quality batches completed at the end of this fiscal year, assuming everything goes right. Okay. Obviously, we
want. And can I pause there, because you had said we want to do everything as quickly as we can, but not jeopardizing safety. And we're in a global pandemic. Other countries need vaccines. We've got the vaccines we need, and thankfully we do, and I'm glad that we do. Other countries desperately need vaccines. And we're going to hear later this afternoon from BioNiagara. They were pushing for an amendment to the Patent Act. They were pushing for us using the Canadian Access to Medicines regime to add, in addition to tuberculosis, malaria, HIV/AIDS, to add COVID-19. And wouldn't it have made sense, as we ramp up domestic manufacturing capacity, as we get closer to Novavax being completed, as we get closer to a place where we can produce vaccines with IP in a Canadian context, wouldn't it have made sense to say on an interim basis, we're going to have BioNiagara produce vaccines and amend the Patent Act and ship vaccines to developing countries that are in desperate need? Mr. Costin?
That answer would need to be very brief, Mme. Aubry, or...
So
it would be to Mr. Costin.
Yeah. So I guess a couple of quick things. I think it's an unavoidable reality that the manufacturing of these vaccines and the fitting up of these facilities takes years and years. And so if you look at a typical and even an aggressive schedule for building and qualifying, like these are extraordinarily technical and finicky processes that do span years. And the reality is in Canada, after these investments, the facility that Maria is describing will be the first one rolling vaccines off the line, and it has been done in by any reasonable comparison, a light speed compared to what you might have seen 10 years ago. The other facilities where we've made investments, I think of Sanofi as an example. Like we'll be waiting several years before this facility is ready and you see vaccines, and that's not because of needless delays. It's just because of the nature of this manufacturing is so. And your point about the global demand, you're absolutely,
Mr. Costin,
Yep.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you. I'm sorry, I have a terrible role here, but we need to move to Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for today's presentation and your work over the last 2 years, because I recall that we, and in this committee in particular, we raised the fact that Canada did not have any strategy for vaccine production and was unable to produce Canadian vaccines in the pandemic context. And Mr. Costin, you confirmed that, saying that in October 2020, we didn't know where we were headed. We had relied on Chinese vaccine, if I remember correctly, Cantino. And if I go back to the numbers, with phase 1, $900 million, $1.3 billion, in phase 2, $2.2 billion. In other words, which was put forward, and you mentioned that there was $1.6 billion spent. So we might think that there is, if I'm calculating correctly, $600 million not spent. So how will these government expenditures, how have they increased the capacity to manufacture in Canada in the short and medium term? And what will we do with the remaining $600 million?
So thank you very much for the question. Maybe just a couple of quick things, and I'll try to be very brief. The strategy my reference to October of 2020, the strategy was following the basis of expert scientific advice, identify what were the candidate vaccines that had the greatest promise to come to market safely and effectively. And Canada made a series of investments across a diversity of platforms, including Moderna, including Pfizer, including Moderna, including Medicago, including Novavax. So there was a portfolio of vaccines that Canada invested in, and we're seeing the results of those investments play out today. In terms of your question about investment priorities going forward, many of those are articulated directly in the strategy itself. We will continue to see investments made upstream in R&D, in talent. We will see investments made to continue to build out our industrial capacity across protein-based vaccines, mRNA vaccines, viral vector vaccines. You will see investments in development of therapeutics and antibody therapies, as well as supply chain investments. So we still have quite a bit of work to do to continue down this path to rebuild the sector, guided by the strategy and strategically building out the ecosystem that is described in the document that was published last summer.
Merci.
Thank you. Keep going.
Je passerai maintenant la parole à M. Mas pour 2 minutes 30. Où est-ce qu'on a M. Massé avec nous? Je pense que non. Donc, à ce moment-là, ça met fin à notre dernière ronde de questions pour la première heure.
Monsieur le Président.
Je veux remercier les témoins qui étaient... Oui.
Point of order. We have someone as a substitute for him. Oh, do you wish to, Ms. Zario, do you wish to take the floor? Ms. Zario, do you wish to take the 1 minute 30 seconds left over for Mr. Mass?
Thank you.
short on time, and we have the second panel coming in. So thank you very much to our witnesses for this first hour. Much appreciated, and thanks for all the hard work you're doing on behalf of Canadians. We'll now suspend just briefly until all our witnesses are in place. Thank you. Have a good day and have a good weekend.
Merci.
Thank you.
expertise in this field. Every witness will have a 6-minute presentation, and then we'll move to questions. And we are starting with John Fulton from BioNiagara. So, Mr. Fulton, you have 6 minutes. Take it away.
Hello. I'd like to start by thanking the Standing Committee of Industry and Technology for inviting me today. I'm the president of BioNiagara in St. Catharines, and I'd like a little clarification. In the last meeting, they referred to BioNiagara as the company that wishes to produce a COVID-19 vaccine. And it's actually Biolese Pharma, a GMP, GLP, industrial level, sterile fill, injectable drug manufacturer based in St. Catharines. In October 2005, during the bird flu H5N1 pandemic, there was a worldwide shortage of the patented antiviral drug, oseltamivir, known as Tamiflu, which at the time was considered the only therapeutic with any effect on this killer virus. Biolese quickly reverse engineered Tamiflu and secured access to millions of Christmas trees that contained the main ingredient necessary to fabricate this drug. At the time, Roche's Tamiflu was under patent, and for Biolese to scale production to meet the needs of this global crisis, a compulsory license would have had to be issued by Industry Canada, now I said, to protect Biolese from litigation. After I contacted the director of patent policy in Ottawa, I discovered that there was legislation on the books which allowed generic manufacturers to produce and patented medicines for global emergencies. And this is currently known as Canada's Access to Medicines Regime, or CAMR. As of 2005, Biolese would have been the first company in the world to attempt to have a drug manufactured using this emergency legislation. In 2003, Canada, under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, was the first country in the world to proudly adopt this legislation from the World Trade Organization's TRIPS agreement. In October 2006, 7 months after applying to have oseltamivir added to Schedule 1 of the Patent Act, which is a necessary first step in applying for a compulsory license, it was successfully listed, and we were the first to have that, achieve that. By then, Canada and other countries had spent sent billions to Roche for their Tamiflu, and that's fortunately by then bird flu. This is 7 months later, after us applying to have this added. Bird flu had ceased to be an immediate threat to the Canadians and the world's population. Unfortunately, now without a country in need, our generic version of Tamiflu, there was no market for it, and we abandoned the project. Let's fast forward to March 1st, 2021. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020, the supply let's go back a bit more here. The supply of the essential medicines and personal protective equipment became critical. The lack of domestic production capacity was a reality check for the Canadian government and its provinces. In response to the insecurity of global supply, a federal government COVID-19 vaccine task force was formed to seek out high potential Canadian candidates for the manufacturing of vaccines. And in May 2020, Deloitte, the contractor, contacted Biolese Pharma on behalf of the COVID-19 task force. Deloitte was ecstatic to have discovered one of the few remaining domestic manufacturers of sterile injectables in Canada that was several years into the construction of a biologics manufacturing center designed to produce monoclonal antibodies. As a result of Deloitte's inquiry, Biolese pivoted to repurposing the facility for vaccine production. Biolese already had the available expertise and equipment to produce millions of doses of adenovirus vector or mRNA vaccines. At that time, BioLise was also busy supplying Canadian hospitals and international health ministries with its sterile injectable medicines, while undergoing the major expansion of its 125,000 square foot, 7-acre St. Catharines based manufacturing plant. At the bequest of Deloitte, BioLise put forth all the requested information to support its fill and finish capacity for specific vaccine platforms, more specifically volume capacity at each stage of the production process, formulation, API production, filtration, filling, sealing, labeling, packaging, and all types of specialized equipment readily available. Readily available on site for vaccine production. The main advantage of BioLise's response to the task force was that all the equipment and expertise necessary to fabricate biologics, as well as the Health Canada licenses to produce vaccines, were immediately available and on site. For example, BioLise has bioreactors up to 2,500 liters, numerous large industrial chromatography systems, multiple high-speed filling lines. It would take 3 years to get a fill line now if you want to buy one, purchase one, have fabricated. All the necessary GLP laboratories, water purification, air filtration systems required. It's worth noting that such specialized equipment would generally take years to acquire, especially that ordering such equipment was nearly an impossibility during the pandemic due to global demand and some supply chain chaos. Considering the readiness of BioLise with the potential of producing a minimum of 20 million and up to 80 million vaccine doses per year, supported by the existing equipment and its level 2 biosecurity GMP GLP facility, BioLise and Deloitte determined that with an investment from the federal government of as little as $4 million, which at the time would have been equivalent to a small PPE order, BioLise, could have hire the necessary contractors and staff to accelerate the repurposing for vaccine production, and within 4 to 6 months be in a position to attract one of the vaccine candidates that BioLise had open dialogues with and that were seeking to expand their production capacity. After spending nearly a year
Mr.
trying
Fulton,
to get support...
as much as I hate to cut you off, you are out of time, but maybe those comments can come forward during the question and answer.
Sure, okay.
Okay, our next...
I have a lot to say. It's quite a story.
All right, yeah, very good. Our next witnesses are from BioVectra, and we have Mr. Technow and Dr. Saar. Feel free to begin your presentation.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Oliver Technow. I'm the CEO of BioVectra, a contract development and manufacturing organization headquartered here in Charlottetown in Prince Edward Island. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Also joining me is Dr. Saar, BioVectra's Chief Science Officer, 20-year veteran of the sector, who's leading the charge on our mRNA vaccine and biomanufacturing expansion. I have 30 plus years of global pharmaceutical industry leadership experience, having lived and worked in Europe, the United States, and Canada. My company is a leading Canadian CDMO with 17 of our clients being among the world's top 20 pharmaceutical companies. Overall, we serve more than 100 clients. We produce active pharmaceutical ingredients, and as a full-service CDMO, we support our clients globally to develop and produce pharmaceuticals and therapies, making a huge difference in the life of patients. We have a 50-year track record with beginnings as a startup company that was the brainchild of Dr. Regis Duffy, former Dean of Science here at UPI. And today we have 600 employees, 5 state-of-the-art facilities in both Charlottetown and Windsor, Nova Scotia, certified by Health Canada, US FDA, and the Japanese PMDA. The key to global competitiveness in our business is that we are continuously investing and expanding our capabilities in terms of offering end-to-end services from clinical development all the way to commercial manufacturing. We announced in November a 79.6 million expansion of our business to produce mRNA vaccines and therapeutics, with the government of Canada contributing 39.8 million through the Strategic Innovation Fund and a 10 million investment from the province of Prince Edward Islands. This is a natural next step for our company as we have decades of experience in making very closely related molecules. Our expansion includes constructing a cutting-edge biomanufacturing facility here in Charlottetown, creating a single-use clinical scale suite in Windsor, Nova Scotia, as well as opening an R&D facility in Halifax. Just broke ground, and when completed in 2023, BioVectra will be able to produce up to 160 million doses of mRNA vaccine per year, with the capability to commercially package or fill finish 70 million doses. So this expansion will add at least 125 new jobs in the sector, generate research partnerships, development opportunities for life sciences and biomanufacturing professionals, and create 225 co-op terms for students. CMOs like ours are ideally positioned to offer the flexibility needed to respond to the next pandemic because we have developed platforms that can produce many types of products for many biopharmaceutical companies. We have specialized talent in research, development, engineering, business development, quality manufacturing that are needed to support the end-to-end life cycle of drug production and manufacturing. Well, over the last several years, Canada has made significant investments into the infrastructure and S&T capabilities needed to reinvigorate the country's domestic biomanufacturing. I believe to truly reinstate Canada as a biomanufacturing leader, that we need to be nurturing an ecosystem that can sustain it over the long term, such as staying on par with other countries' investments into new technologies, which will remain crucial to attract more global pharmaceutical companies to come to Canada. Also, I believe the focus now needs to shift from bricks and mortar investments towards building a more robust bioscience talent pipeline. Talent truly is the catalyst to a robust and globally competitive Canadian biomanufacturing sector, and we should be aiming really high to make Canada a prime talent destination. The economic growth potential for this sector is enormous, and our ability to succeed or fail is contingent upon building, attracting, and retaining our human capital. First step I see needed to grow is to retain top talent in the country. We need engineers, scientists, and technicians who can see an attractive career path in the bioscience sector in Canada. We need to be targeting graduates from all academic levels and make the sector attractive by taking approaches such as offering transition to work opportunities and establishing more co-op student placements. This can be best solved in close collaboration and partnership between the private and public sector. And one good example of this is CASTLE, the Canadian Alliance of Skills and Training in Life Sciences, headquartered here in Prince Edward Island. CASTLE is the result of close collaboration between different levels of government, industry, academia, and brings world-class technical training curriculum as the exclusive partner from Ireland's globally recognized National Institute for Bioprocessing Research and Training to Canada. BioVectra was involved in the development and is an early adopter of CASTLE, which is a one-stop shop for our industry's training and academic requirements. And I urge our decision makers to create better conditions to also attract talent from around the world so they choose Canada as the destination to make their career. And I believe governments could play a leading role adopting policies that streamline and speed up immigration process to tackle the domestic talent gaps that we know they're coming, and create other options such as other countries do. For example, personal income tax incentives, which have proven to be quite successful. Our experience has been to attract international talent, you need to offer an attractive place to live. I'd like to see our leaders continue to work swiftly to create conditions that make Canada the place, such as improving immediate access to healthcare, childcare, middle-income home ownership. And a lesson from the pandemic that we need to keep at the forefront is to nurture and sustain Canada's domestic biomanufacturing capability that will help prepare Canada to pivot and respond quickly to the next global crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Technow. Our next witness from Vito Intervac is Dr. Gertz. So, Dr. Gertz, you have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Volker Gertz. I'm the director of VIDO, which stands for the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, a research institute here at the University of Saskatchewan. We're on Treaty 6 territory, the homeland of the Métis. And we operate here one of Canada's largest and even the world's largest high containment research institutes for infectious diseases and vaccine development. We have now about 170 researchers from more than 28 countries. More than 50% of them are female, representing, or 40% of our staff representing visible minorities. VIDO is funded through an MSI grant from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So 60% of our operating funding for parts of our facility, not for the whole, but parts of our facility are coming from CFI. And VIDO has been really leading Canada's response to COVID. We were the first in the country to isolate the virus and then distribute it to all diagnostic labs in the country. We were the first in Canada to have an animal model established, the first university with a vaccine in clinical trials, which is now in trials in Africa, in Uganda, but also entering now a trial here in Canada for booster studies, so using our vaccine as a boost to already authorized vaccines. And during the last 2 years, worked with almost 100 companies from all around the world to find and test their solutions, whether it's vaccines, therapeutics, or antivirals for this disease. The organization overall receives support, as I mentioned, from CFI, but also from the government of Saskatchewan. And during the pandemic in particular, we received funding from ICET for our vaccine research, but also to develop a manufacturing facility here in-house. And this is, of course, what we're talking about today. So VIDO is building currently an in-house manufacturing facility that will enable us to work with or manufacture both human and animal vaccines. And very unique about our facility that is actually connected into our containment. So as one of a handful in the whole world, we will be able to make vaccines for those pathogens that require higher levels of containment, often referred to as high consequence pathogens. The facility is construction is almost complete. It will be commissioned by fall of this year, and we're anticipating to be able to start production in Q4 of 2022. This facility can produce a variety of technologies, including the RNA vaccines. It also can make viral vector vaccines, life and some mammalian cell-based vaccines, as well as subunit vaccines. And that's what VIDO's vaccine is actually, a subunit protein vaccine. We envision that depending on which technology, our facility can in principle make as many as 40 million doses a year. However, it is a pilot scale manufacturing facility, which is really driven to quickly drive innovation from the discovery stage and get it quickly into clinical trials. VIDO is, of course, part and a pillar in Canada's life science and biomanufacturing strategy. We're of course happy to support the strategy as outlined in there. And that includes, for example, all the training mission. We have a number of graduate students here that are being trained in not only in the discovery science, but now also being trained in the manufacturing and then also in the operation of the facility. And we think that is critical as we look forward and preparing for the future to have the skills, as we just heard from Dr. Techno, the skilled workers who are able to operate these facilities. And just as a side note, during the pandemic, we had to recruit over 30 researchers who were able to work in high containment with the virus, and it takes usually 6 months from recruiting a person to getting them to be comfortable working with a potentially lethal virus in the lab. And so lastly, VIDO has received funding in last year's budget, so not in yesterday's budget, but in the one last year, to become or take on the role as Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research. And so as part of that, we have received funding from the Government of Canada, but also the Government of Saskatchewan, the City of Saskatoon, and many private and corporate donors to now expand our capacity. So we're upgrading our containment space to the highest level, to containment level 4. There we're doubling Canada's capacity for high containment. We're building a new animal facility, which will enable us to work all year round with those species from which we see these diseases emerge. And as I mentioned, we're about to open our manufacturing facility. And so all of that will allow us to now bring the world's best researchers to Canada and attract companies to Canada who then will use this infrastructure in the future to make sure that Canada will never find itself in the situation as we did 2 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gertz. Our next witness appearing as an individual is Dr. Lamar. Dr. Lamar, you have 6 minutes.
Merci,
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I wish to thank the committee for the invitation to participate in this meeting. This is an essential topic for national security in facing the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially to prepare ourselves better to face possible future pandemics. I am a professor at the Centre Armand Frappier of Biotechnology of the INRS in Laval, and I conduct research on antiviral immune response for over 30 years and on the development of vaccines and immunotherapies. Therefore, I'm particularly interested in this topic today. Canada faces today an insufficient vaccine production capacity for its needs, and I would include in this category biologics such as monoclonal antibodies and immunotherapies. This shortage of production capacity leaves Canadians reliant on a form of protectionism from other producing countries for vaccines and other biologics. In recent months, Canada has begun substantial investments to reestablish its national production capacity, but an even greater effort ought to be made in future years in order to rebuild a rich and diversified ecosystem at all levels of the vaccine development chain. I welcome, among other things, investment in the Biologics Production Centre of the National Research Council of Canada in Montreal, as well as the company Medicago in Quebec City that has manufactured the only vaccine manufactured in Canada and approved by Health Canada. Other major investments have been made for other private companies across the country, and other projects are under development, such as the building of the next Biologics Production Centre and Vaccine Centre, Smoke Pond Biologics, here in Laval. These investments have already begun to bear fruit, but we will have to continue them and increase them in the future. It should be noted that Canada ranks last in the G7 for research and development expenditures. For example, Canada invests half as much in R&D technologies compared to the U.S. in terms of percentage of GDP. In this sense, the measures announced yesterday in the 2022 budget by the federal government on the creation of a Canada Growth Fund with $15 billion capital over 5 years is a good step in the right direction and will make it possible to have leverage with private investors, among others, in order to restructure supply chains, which I think ought to include biologics and vaccines, as well as individual protection equipment. I think it will be important for the federal government to invest substantial funds in 3 sectors in particular in order to consolidate these investments and maximize the potential spin-offs for vaccine production. The first of these would be to continue and increase federal investment in basic research in Canada. Fundamental research represents an indispensable component in the development of new technologies connected with vaccination and health in general. It would therefore be important to increase the subsidies for research, and in this sense, unfortunately, I note that the 2022 budget does not mention any significant increase in the budget for federal subsidizing agencies. I think that an increase of some 10% over the next 10 years is necessary if we want to regain a leadership role on the world stage. Secondly, I believe that we should continue and increase federal investment in research infrastructure, high-tech research by the Canada Innovation Fund, an essential partner, as we've just seen, for VIDO, for example, which invests in high-end technology infrastructure. It's essential in future years to continue and increase investment not only in infrastructure, but also to finance their operation and long-term maintenance costs to maximize the spin-offs from these investments. And thirdly, we ought to create a financing structure at the interface between academic research and the pharmaceutical industry in the development of vaccines. Indeed, a public research ecosystem that's rich and diversified is becoming increasingly important for the development and marketing of new treatments and innovative vaccines for patients. Government investment in the sector of upgrading innovations that are created in universities ought to make it possible to do clinical development of promising candidate vaccines until they're mature enough to attract the interest of global pharmaceutical companies that will invest in their large-scale production and distribution. In conclusion, Canada must do more to better position itself at the international level in terms of biomanufacturing and be better positioned to combat COVID-19 and other pandemics in the future. Thank you, and I'll be available to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lamar. And our final witness is Mr. Andrew Casey from Biotech Canada. So, Mr. Casey, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity to provide input into the study. By way of introduction, Biotech Canada is the national association that represents Canada's biotech industry. Our 240 members stretch across the country, and they include the large multinational pharmaceutical companies, many of which are in the vaccine development and manufacturing capacity. But we also have most of our members are the early stage biotech companies that have good ideas that are coming out of our university labs or research institutes that they're trying to commercialize, trying to take out to the marketplace. So a very diverse, robust membership, and it includes BioVectra and Vito, both of which have testified here today. As I was preparing for this session, I sort of reflected that it was exactly a year ago to this day that I had my first vaccine shot. And if you think back to the early days of the pandemic back in March of 2020, the earliest predicted timeframe for getting vaccines was 3 to 5 years out. That we were able to start putting them into arms about a year ago is a remarkable scientific feat. And I think that needs to be recognized, that we're even having this discussion today about how to prepare for the next one with vaccines and developing biomanufacturing capacity is truly remarkable. It's a testament to science. It's a testament to this industry and the work that it's done. And full credit as well to our regulators, including Health Canada and the Innovation Department at ICED. Also, there is Canadian biotechnology in one of those vaccines, and it's important to recognize that the Pfizer vaccine has the Acuitas technology, which is the lipid envelope within which the mRNA coating is put into the body. So the Canadian industry, the biotech industry, has played a really important role in delivering on some of these vaccines. We're not out of this mess. We still have a lot of work to be done, and I think we've heard from some of the companies today the important role that they're going to play in sort of addressing some of these challenges coming up, including Medicago, which was discussed in the earlier session. I think it's very prudent, though, to start to prepare for the possibility, the very real possibility, that there is a COVID 40 or a COVID 50. You can pick your year, and I'll use COVID as an example, but it is not necessarily going to be another COVID-like challenge. But we do have to prepare. I think most governments around the world were sort of caught off guard by the pandemic. There's a recognition that they don't want to be doing this on an ad hoc basis going forward, and it makes sense to prepare for the next one and invest heavily. Thankfully, in Canada, as we've seen from the companies that presented today, we have a very robust ecosystem here upon which to build. And as you heard in the panel earlier with the officials from the government, significant investments have come forward from the government to enhance and grow that capacity. We're building on some fantastic companies in this country, including BioVectra, including Vito, including Medicago, and others. There's some great partnerships as well between Sanofi Pasteur and the government. Moderna, you've seen the growth in the NRC facility. Those are some very significant investments as well. So we are in a very good position. We're building on something that's a very strong foundation. If I had some advice for the committee, and I'll leave it with this, is a couple of things. One is we don't know what the next challenge is going to be. So it's very hard to predict what the next solution is going to be. If we had this discussion 5 years ago, I'm not so sure we would have chosen mRNA vaccines as the solution. So we have to be very careful about what we're putting all of our bets on. The second thing is, it is imperative that we sort of increase the number of shots on net. So the growth of the ecosystem is going to be really important. And that ecosystem includes all components, not only the early stage companies and the ones that are existing, but also the multinational companies that are a very important part of that ecosystem, working closely together. The other part is we have to look at this as not just in case of an emergency situation. Let's hope it's not good for another 30 or 40 years. But what do you do with those investments in between? It's like Olympic athletes. You don't just sort of participate every 4 years, you train in between. So we have to do likewise with whatever these investments are. They have to be connected into the existing ecosystem to grow it and to leverage those strengths. And the last piece I think is really important, and it's been mentioned a couple of times by my colleagues, is the talent one. We have to grow our talent pool here. This is a global challenge. Every country's got their elbows up. They're going to be looking to steal our people. We have to attract talent. We have to keep talent. This is going to be absolutely paramount. We have a really strong foundation upon which to build. The investments are solid. They're going to really support the growth of the industry. I'm encouraged by that. But if we don't work collectively and sort of understand where it's all going, we're going to be in a bit more trouble. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Casey, and to all of our witnesses for their very informative presentations. We'll now move on to the question and answer portion, and our first questioner is Monsieur Deltel from the Conservative Party. So, Monsieur Deltel, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you all for participating once again with a very high level of quality, and we greatly appreciate each of your testimonies. I would like to, first of all, ask a question to Dr. Lamar. Hello, and thank you for participating in our exercise. You mentioned, of course, investments that have occurred in recent years, particularly to face COVID. And you also mentioned the success that we have seen. And you'll understand that as a Quebecer and myself as a citizen of Quebec City, I was happy to see that a local company distinguished itself by the creation of a new drug, a new vaccine. However, I personally was surprised and disappointed that the World Health Organization did not recognize that vaccine. I would like to know on your part, how did you respond when you learned that the vaccine developed in Canada was not recognized by the WHO? Indeed, it was in fact a surprise for many people, for myself as well. Well, of course, based on what I understand, it is not on account of the efficacy nor of the safety problem that might occur with that Medicago drug, but rather on account of its ties with a tobacco company. And as a matter of fact, I think that that is a position which was known on the part of the WHO and that can be defended absolutely from a global health context. So I believe that it's up to Medicago and the government to work with its financial partners in order to find a solution that could be acceptable for the WHO and to guarantee that this vaccine, which in fact has provided excellent results in clinical studies, could receive the approval of the WHO and be used, among other things, in the COVAX program to be able to be distributed to countries which still have a pressing need for it, whereas here in Canada, very likely the need for it is not as great, but it does remain very important across the planet. I really appreciate, Doctor, that you mentioned the quality of the research and the quality of the product, and this is what is a disappointment, to put it that way, that with so much talent that we have, so much quality in a product that we can bring to the market, and here we're talking about solving lives, hundreds of thousands or even millions of lives through Canadian brilliancy and the efforts that were made in this country, that unfortunately we cannot go beyond that because of an administrative technicality. You mentioned earlier that the position was known and can be defended. I'm asking you this without having a personal opinion on it, but do you consider that on account of the urgency of the situation, the importance of the research, and the global impact that it can have for your part as a researcher and an experienced academic, that the WHO ought to soften its rules in such an urgent situation as the one we're facing? Well, I believe that this is a position which is quite defensible, of course. Now, will the WHO want to change its rules? Perhaps not. But I believe that it is not too late to be able to take action at that level, being aware that other investors and even the federal government could take up the share of the cigarette company. So I don't believe that it is a complete write-off. I think there is room for negotiation, perhaps a negotiation with the WHO, because they are open to, let's say, soften that rule for reasons of the pandemic. It would be, anyway, it would be an argument that could be made at any rate. But will they be open to do that? That's another question. Along the same lines, Doctor, in the previous testimony, we learned that right from the start, the government was aware of the WHO rules and was aware of the shared ownership of the company in question. In a few words, everyone knew about it. So not being an expert in the field, I was surprised to observe that and very disappointed, to say the least, to be polite. So how do you judge the fact that everyone knew about it and nobody took action? Well, I think we need to refer to the beginning, refer back to a period when the company, and in fact, I'm not really involved in the company. I have no shares and I'm not, so, I don't have any bias with respect to what that company is doing. But my understanding is that in the initial phases of development, whatever capital is available and is offered is taken up. So in this case, I imagine that Philip Morris thought there was some affinity, at least in relation to the plant being used in the manufacturing of it, which is a plant that is in the tobacco family. So for that reason, there was some affinity with that company. And I'm not going to be the first to throw a stone. I will not throw the first stone at Medicago, because the startup for a biotech at the beginning was a very small biotech, which came from the academic sector and which grew, and it needed capital for its development. So I do not believe that it was an error on the part of Medicago, which is what enabled them to develop. However, later on in the development process, could we have reviewed that, aware as we were of that WHO clause, could we have reviewed the structure, let's say, the actuarial structure of the company? That is a question that is important to ask.
Very much, Dr. Lamar and Monsieur Deltel. Next, from the Liberal Party, we have Mr. Fillmore for 6 minutes. Mr. Fillmore, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the witness panel today for sharing your time and experiences with us. I'd like to direct my questions to the team from Charlottetown today, if I could, the BioVectra team. I noticed, Mr. Technow, on the website, I've spent some time on your website today. Back in November, there was you had an announcement about the development of a new mRNA production facility. There was a beautiful photograph with Minister Champagne and Charlottetown MP Sean Casey. I wondered if you could tell us about the arc, the journey that you're on with this facility, and where you are now, and how the federal government has been able to assist along that journey.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, as you said, Mr. Fillmore, the start of this
Thank you. I wonder if Dr. Sauer might want to step in. It appears that Mr. Technow's camera is frozen.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned in November, we announced the expansion of our facility into mRNA vaccine manufacturing, as well as the establishment of a state-of-the-art process development facility to go with it. We are currently at the phase where we have, in early 2022, started the construction on the development areas and facilities, and we will break ground actually this Thursday on the mRNA vaccine facility in Charlottetown. We're currently foreseeing a time frame of about 12 months to get this to conclusion. At that point, we will go into equipment qualification and we'll be ready to transfer first projects into the facility.
Thanks, Dr. Sauer. Now, this is going to be an important part of BioVectra's ability to face whatever the next 7-year cycle brings us in terms of a pandemic. Is there anything, are you facing any other hurdles in terms of, fill and finish or production capacity, anything else that would stand between you today and being able to address whatever the next pandemic might be?
No, I mean, fill finish is going to be part of the expansion. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Hope it's just me. The fill finish is going to be a part of the expansion. So, I mean, the investment into the project and the project itself was meant to be a complete end-to-end solution for the development and production of mRNA vaccines and therapies. So, we don't, in this case, we wouldn't see any hurdles that would allow us to be complete offer for said vaccines. I think Mr. Fulton pointed out that supply chain, has been strained over the past 2 years. But in this case, for us, we were able to secure partnerships with key suppliers of equipment and consumables that would be needed to get the facility up in time.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Sauer. Now, Mr. Technow in his opening remarks mentioned that, of course, you've got the main facility in Charlottetown. There's now a facility in Windsor, Nova Scotia, and I think he mentioned a new facility in Halifax. I know this is this is a complex manufacturing process. I wonder if you could just elucidate on what the role of the three locations are. Of course, I'm particularly happy to hear about the Halifax location, being that I represent Halifax. Thank you.
Of course. So Charlottetown is our headquarters. We have operated out of the site for the past 50 years. For the mRNA, vaccine expansion, it allowed us to act quickly because it is not a greenfield expansion there. So we are able to bolt it onto the existing facility. So we are in a position to use utilities that are already in place, which also cuts down on the total time to get this up and running. Windsor in Nova Scotia is our headquarters for biologics therapeutics, and what we're doing there is we're expanding it to bring on single-use clinical scale, operational, equipment that would allow us not only to produce commercial but also materials that are either needed for smaller patient population or for clinical trials. And then Halifax will be our new home for the state-of-the-art process development center. So we will move most of our development teams out of the Windsor facility to Halifax, and then establish there, a truly remarkable facility for development, discovery, and also characterization.
Bravo! I'm very glad to hear that. Mr. Chair, is there another minute? Or? Right at time. Okay, Dr. Sauer, thank you very much, and please give my thanks to Mr. Technow as well.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sauer and Mr. Fillmore. Our next witness, or our next questioner is Monsieur Lemire from the Bloc Québécois. Monsieur Lemire, you have 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lamar, Dr. Lamar, it's a great pleasure to see you at this committee once again. As I said before, when sending out the invitation, I thought you were a very important witness for this committee. And what I've noted from your vision is the idea of financing all along the chain of vaccines and medication that will carry on in the long term at all levels in research to rebuild a rich, innovative, collaborative, flexible, and diversified ecosystem. And you talked about that earlier. I would like to hear you on this. Over the past year, since you last came, are you satisfied with the development of the work that has been done by the government, particularly the Canadian government? Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there have been substantial investments that have been made. We are hearing about some of the results now from some of the colleagues here on the committee. And what I mentioned, the existence of, there are a number of others that are also being developed. We heard a good announcement from Hamilton for a cellular biology center, and there is the project of Smoke Pond Biologics here in Laval, which we are very enthusiastic about. And there has been movement around Canada, across Canada. There have been substantial investments by the federal government. So I believe that this is a very good thing. And it's really later on in the production chain of vaccines. I think we must not neglect the start, the generation of innovation. In other words, fundamental research, basic research that is done in research institutes as well as in Canadian universities. And this research relies almost entirely on federal government investment on research, either research institutes in health for Canada or the CRSNG for natural engineering and natural sciences. So we still have work to do because research institutes have increased substantially in recent years, especially, and NSERC, that is, including NSERC. So this has increased, and the cost of research is going up, with the cost of living going up, and the cost of infrastructures is going up, and the cost of personnel is going up. So the result is that for $1 billion a year, if that budget doesn't go up substantially, then it will result in a success rate that will reduce considerably from year to year in the competitions at NSERC and others. So for that reason, innovations that might come out from Canadian universities will not receive the appropriate level of financing. So what I would like to see when it comes to government investment is a substantial increase in budgets from the three federal councils, about 10% a year over a 10-year period, in order to bring Canada, to raise Canada to a position a little bit more similar to the position of the various countries that are leaders in the field, in the G7, the USA, or in Europe. So there is still work to be done. You have probably heard, as I have, particularly during the first hour, plenty of numbers on amounts for rebuilding biologics and vaccine industry in Canada. 900 million in phase one, 1.3 billion for a total of 2.2 billion. But there's 1.6 billion spent only, so there's 600 million left that hasn't been spent yet. So how can we invest in the short term? How can we invest that money in the short term to make sure that we become attractive for the pharmaceutical industry? Right. Well, I think indeed creating structures similar to what is going on in the National Research Council of Canada at the interface between academic research and the pharmaceutical industry, which would be independent from the ups and downs of the market, as is the case for some pharmaceutical companies or contract research companies. So there would be subsidies from public funding in order to be able to develop technologies that are discovered in universities or research institutes and carry them to a level of clinical study, of phase one, human studies, and then there remains work to be done. Indeed, I believe that this is money that could be very well invested by the federal government. We hope so, because the message that was sent out yesterday is rather feeble. 20 million over 5 years, starting in 2020 to 2022 for Canada's health research institutes. So the message is not coming out as strong as what it may have been over the past year. What signal does that send? And as a last question, do you have the impression that some supplies are lacking in the chain? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it is indeed a concern to me. The success rates for the RSCs is going down. It's below 20% every time there's a competition. So excellent research proposals are not being financed. And even if a project is financed, it's cut by 26 or 27% as for its research budget. So the CIHR. So it's less money to deal with, to take care of the staff. And as had been said by a number of people who have spoken before me, it is indeed important to have money in the infrastructure, but we also have to inject money into highly qualified staff and graduate students, for example, or postdoctoral interns, to have substantial budgets for training bursaries or learning bursaries or research internships that would make it possible to have a, let's say, a high-level scientific community in Canada in order to be able to recruit, as in the biomanufacturing industry or vaccine manufacturing. So This is a concern to me, even more so because the supply chains are indeed an issue, but I think that that is being solved. But we need to continue developing our qualified labor force in order to be able to work in those industries in the coming years. Thank you very much, Dr. Lamar. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Yes, thank you, Dr. Lamar and Monsieur Lemire. And finally, from the NDP, we have Ms. Zerillo for 6 minutes. Ms. Zerillo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll start with a question with Mr. Fulton, and if I have time, I will go to Mr. Techno on labor shortages. So, Mr. Fulton, I think I heard correctly that the government did not know of the expertise of BioLease or other companies able to manufacture vaccine and only found out by accident. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I can't hear. Mr. Speaker? Sorry, Mr. Speaker, it's just I couldn't.
I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't have my
so
microphone
my
on.
question for Mr. Fulton, just around the expertise and the fact that the government wasn't aware and only found out by accident when a consulting group made an inquiry. So my question is, what can the government do to have a comprehensive list of the certified and capacity-ready manufacturers to quickly manufacture a critical vaccine and therapeutics when needed in Canada?
Oh, just to clarify, some feedback here. Deloitte was the contractor hired by the Government of Canada or through the Vaccine Task Force to search out companies like BioLease. As far as I know, in Canada, producing injectables currently, there's a handful. There's Omega, Sandoz, BioLease Pharma, that I know of, three industrial size facilities. So this was, they reached out to, I think it was May 1st, 2020. We started a dialogue. We were sending all kinds of documentation. So they were well aware, the government was well aware, the task force was well aware that BioLease existed. And I think what we need going forward is a meeting just like this, where there's transparency, there's independent groups that can look at this, not a task force that really wasn't, the public wasn't made aware of till a few months after they were in existence. So just having this kind of discourse, having this kind of conversation now is a help. If I had a time machine, I'd go back 2 years and try to put together a group like this to have this discussion. You know, BioLease is sitting there with all that equipment, all that expertise, the Health Canada approvals for producing vaccines, and it's still sitting idle. They only asked for a few $1 million to hire more contractors, more staff, and they could have been up and running. We tried to use CAMR, we tried to use the access to medicines regime. I've been calling, sending emails, met with over 40 different individuals within the government, officials, and we can't get a straight answer on how to use that legislation that I used effectively in 2005-06, but they they won't have a discussion with us regarding that. They won't really start talking, because once the government starts talking, Schedule 1, the addition of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, it triggers the addition to Schedule 1. And once we're on Schedule 1, we can ask for a compulsory license and move forward with the project. So I had a lot to say here today. Unfortunately, I got cut short, but that's really it. It's just having these kind of open discussions with the public and experts and government officials to really figure out how to solve this problem. I'm not hearing.
Ms. Earl, I hate to interrupt, but you have to turn your microphone on.
Thank you. I'm just going to pivot now to Mr. Techno on labor shortages. A number of witnesses talked about it today. And I just wanted to ask about for your business and also for ancillary businesses that support your business. We know that labor shortages are and can be an issue. So if you could just expand a little bit on labor shortages, what is needed to attract and retain workers in your industry and to ancillary industries that support the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I hope this time I can get through my answer without technical issues. So maybe to provide some context here. So during the pandemic, we have onboarded approximately 150 new employees at BioVectra, despite, of course, the challenges of having to do this remotely and with all the protocols in place. But it has also accelerated a realization that, if you make up and kind of work towards new technologies, and part of our biomanufacturing strategy in Canada is to kind of make sure that we have new technologies, cutting edge technologies in the country to respond to future health crises more quicker and more efficient. You also realize that there's a talent shortage to actually kind of run these processes and fill these new projects and investments with life. In my industry in particular, now we're talking about all these new technologies, and it's a handful of people that have firsthand experience in Canada with these type of technologies. So by default, we are actually depending on immigrating and attracting talent from abroad. So this has been a little bit more of a pronounced situation, as given our company's location, though, being in Eastern Canada, we have to be very creative from the get-go, and we have found a lot of really effective ways to attract the right talent from all over the globe. But I would actually predict that this labor shortage that we see in our industry will only accelerate. I think there's been studies out there very recently talking about almost a gap of 60,000 people, if I get the number correctly, to actually even deliver on the current biomanufacturing strategy. So that gives us a little bit of an idea of what's at stake and what's at hand here. So as I said in my presentation, we need to kind of come to the table in private-public partnerships and really tackle this issue from ground on, and making sure that we have the inroads into academia, streamlined and quicker immigration. As far as the labor shortage on the auxiliary businesses are concerned, I don't think I'm qualified to talk about this a lot. We see obviously some of the challenges in supply chain. As we all are aware, there are certain parts of a bricks and mortar construction site like steel is becoming more and more difficult to source, but also this general topic of the big and great resignation that doesn't stop in Canada or doesn't stop in my industry. It's all over the world. It's in every sector and every trade. So we have to be a little bit more creative. And my recommendation is, I said it earlier, we need to aim high, right? It's not enough to try to kind of make up for other jurisdictions who have some maybe kind of innovative and attractive programs in place, because by the time we catch up here in Canada, those guys have already moved ahead. So I really encourage us to have a very ambitious plan, a very ambitious task force in the future that addresses these challenges with a sustainability in mind.
Okay, thank you very much to all of our witnesses. Ms. Zerillo, your time is up, and I will now hand the chair back over to Monsieur Lightbound.
Thank you very much, Michael, for chairing this meeting in my absence. I appreciate it. And thanks to our witnesses for being here with us. It's been very interesting, and I've been listening all along. Thank you very much. And before we adjourn, there is just a small item of business I'd like to get it over with. Witnesses, if you want to disconnect, this is committee business at this point, so you may consider yourself thanked fully by committee members. We appreciate your presence here. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. For committee members, I believe there have been discussions between the parties, and there is consent to adopt Mr. Lemire's motion on competitiveness. So I'm just looking for unanimous consent around the room so that the clerk and the analyst can get to work inviting the witnesses for this study when we come back from the break. So I see a thumbs up from Mr. Massé. I know Mr. Lemire is on board. I see no objection in the room. So I gather we have unanimous consent for the motion that has been distributed amongst members. Thank you all for your great work. Have a great weekend, safe travels, and we will see each other in 3 weeks. Goodbye. This meeting's adjourned.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux traducteurs.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the interpreters and the technical team. Thank you, Mr. McPherson.